Hello, welcome to photo mode in Ren'Py. Because this is the full video, I'm going to be giving some extra tips to make best use of photo mode in your game. And then I'm going to be talking about how it was made and the code behind it. A quick reminder, if you don't know how to install it, go to photo mode in Ren'Py, hit the download button. You'll get a file called cute_photo_mode.rpy. Then you're going to go to your Ren'Py project. You're just going to drop the file inside of your game folder. And then, immediately after the start label, you're going to type in camera at photo mode_active. And that will just make it work. So you'll have this parallax effect going on at all times, which you can of course change into settings, and I'll help you change that later. Then when you hit H, you'll activate photo mode, which allows you to move the camera around, zoom in and out, rotate. You can even change the colors. There's a lot of fun to be had with it. Here I'll give an example of why photo mode is just better to have in your game than not. So this is the question demo. It's built into the Ren'Py launcher. Let's just hit start. You have a standard visual novel here. Have some text. A new background comes up, and then we have a sprite. So nothing interesting is going on right now. When you hit H in Ren'Py, by default, all it does is hide the user interface. So I'm going to hit H right now. And now the user interface is hidden. You could, for example, hit S right now. That will take a screenshot. And then you can re-enable it by pressing H again. So that's all nice and all, but it's not very interesting because, why take a screenshot of a visual novel that looks exactly the same as if you just uploaded a PNG of it? So let's change it up with photo mode. I'm gonna install photo mode into the question demo. So first, following the instructions from before, we're just gonna put that file we downloaded into the game folder. And then immediately after the start label, I'm going to type camera at photo_mode_active. And then I'm going to hit save. I'm going to open the question. I'm going to launch it. We're going to see the difference. I'm going to hit start. We're going to keep going back to where we were. So we have a nice sprite on the screen. Now, when you're moving your mouse around, there's this parallax effect that makes the character that's closer to us move a little bit faster than the background. And now, when we hit H, instead of just hiding the user interface, we activate this photo mode interface instead, which allows us to move the scene around with our mouse. We can zoom in and out with our scroll wheel. We have the rotate, and we have the color menu, which you can mess around with. And this is a lot more interesting than just hiding user interface. You can, really composition your photo however you like, and you just click your mouse button, and boom, you get a screenshot. Or you can take another screenshot. And now you can do whatever you want with that screenshot, basically. So, imagine you're a player. They want to share some cool moments in your visual novel. They can take that personalized screenshot that, is unique from everyone else and, it doesn't look like just a PNG of your visual novel. So let's try to maximize your usage of photo mode in your game. So let's remove the question for now. I have this demo project. It's nothing interesting. It's just a pretty standard project. First, I want to add a couple settings into the game just to make photo mode a little bit easier to use. So I'm in the photo mode file right now. I'm scrolling down and I'm looking for some settings. So it's right over here. So pressing H to activate photo mode is nice and all, but your player might not realize what that control is. So if you want to add an actual button, you could just take this. You just need to invoke the hide interface action, and I have an example text button here that does that. So I'm just going to take that, and then I'm going to go to screens.rpy, and I'm just going to put this into the quick menu. Now you can put this wherever you want, but I think the quick menu makes sense. So I'm just gonna put it here with everyone else. I'm just gonna paste that in there. And that's gonna add the button that invokes the hide interface action on the quick menu. So I'm gonna save. Here's the game. And now you can see at the quick menu down here at the bottom, we have this photo mode button. And all that does is, well, it activates photo mode just before. Instead of pressing H, we have an actual button. You can read. You can see, oh, what's photo mode? Let me see what happens when I click on it. Okay, then you have photo mode. And then you might have noticed, I've already told you, but there is this parallax effect going on just at all times, which you may or may not enjoy. And, choices are always nice. Especially, this is a visual novel, so you think choices are important. So I have this setting here that controls how strong that effect is. It's the parallax. So I have a bar here. I've already made an example for you. You could just copy that. And I'm also going to put that into my game menu this time. So that would be, I want to put it, see this space here underneath text speed and auto forward time. I'm going to put it right there. So I'm going to go to screens.rpy. I'm going to look for the screen game menu, or even better, I'm just going to look up text speed. There we go. So this is the preference screen. And here's the VBox that contains those two bars. And I want to add a third bar underneath. So I'm gonna put a label here. And then I'm gonna put these brackets so that this will work for translation if that is needed in the future. I'm gonna call this Parallax Intensity. And I'm just going to paste that bar from before. And all this bar is doing is changing that parallax variable. So I'm going to save. And now there's this bar here called parallax intensity. So right now it's maxed out. So it makes the parallax effect work. You can reduce it all the way to 0, and as you can see, nothing moves anymore. It's completely disabled. Photo mode still works though, so that only affects your general gameplay. So that's two settings you should probably add into your game. Now I'm going to talk about how to make your scenes look nicer inside of photo mode, because photo mode will only look as good as you make your scene. So I'm gonna go back to my script. So it's all the only changes here is I put in this statement, but this is a default project. And if we scroll down here, I put this little scene here. We have the forest, I have a tiger, and I have the bushes at the front. So you have that forest background. Let me just turn the parallax back on. See, the forest is back there, we have this tiger, and we have the bushes, but these are actually on different layers. And the reason that there's a parallax effect going on is because these elements, this background, foreground, and whatever's in the middle, are actually at different Z positions on the Z axis. Let me draw a diagram to explain what I mean. So imagine we're looking top down. We have this PNG in the back. This is your background. Then further forward, we have another PNG. Let's do a little smaller one because it's not as big as the background. This is the tiger. Then, even further forward, we have these bushes. And by putting these at different levels on the Z-axis, so this is the Z-axis here, and we have a camera pointing forward, by moving the camera around, you have a natural parallax effect, just because of the distance of things. That's how physics works. Things further back look as if they're going slower. So you imagine, you have a moon somewhere over here, way in the back, that's barely going to move. It's going to look like it's following you. That's how it works in real life. So all this is doing is just taking a real life phenomenon, and we're using that to our advantage. So this is a fairly, simple scene, but we can of course add as many layers as we want. So I'm going to fill our little scene with lots of animals, and I have animals ready other than the tiger, but let's just do them in order. I've kind of done it in backwards order. So I have a horse, and then I have an eagle, and then I have a butterfly. I have a dolphin. I know, how did a dolphin get in a forest? We have a hedgehog, or I just spelled it as hog. And then we have our tiger back. Let's put that back. Put that back. And then I have T-Rex as well. Right, so we have a forest background. We have all these animals, and then we have our foreground bush. FG foreground. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to see we have all these animals that's been added to our scene, and then we activate photo mode. You can see the foreground moving in front of them at a much faster rate. You see the background's moving slower in the back, but right now all the animals are kind of stuck on this singular layer, so it doesn't feel very dynamic. This horse is tiny, but it's moving at the same speed as this tiger, so it doesn't look very realistic or convincing. But that's fine. We just need to layer these so that they're at different positions along the Z-axis. And conveniently, I have a transform that I've made. This is part of photo mode. When you drag the file into here, you get this. So I'm just going to stagger the Z positions of all of these animals. So the forest is called BG, meaning it's already automatically set at Z position minus 1000. That's what happens when you call it BG forest. Or I believe it's 2000. You'll see how we do that later. And our foreground, because it's labeled FG at the beginning, that one's actually placed at 500. So the bigger the number, the closer it is to the camera, and the further away it is, the more negative you should put that number. So I'm gonna walk basically from the back to the front. So we'll start at, we'll start close. We don't need to be that far back, possibly 1000. And then I'm just gonna walk forward. So I'm just gonna copy paste these to everyone. So everyone's gonna have a Z distance, and I'm gonna walk forward. Let's say about 200 each time. Put this at 800. This would be at 600. So numbers are getting smaller, but the number is actually getting bigger because it's a negative number. So minus 400. So we're getting closer to 0. 400, 200, negative 200. This will be at 0, so our tiger is back at 0. Now, if you don't write anything, it actually defaults to 0. So this doesn't actually do anything, but it's nice to know what it means. And then we're going to move forward. So now we're at positive 200. So all we've done is we've kind of staggered these by about 200 each time. So I'm just going to hit save. We're going to see what the difference is. You can kind of tell it right now just with the natural parallax. We activate photo mode, it becomes really obvious. As you can see, we have the T-Rex is moving really fast just when we move the camera. And then as we move back, you can see how these are now at different layers. So they're not all squashed into a single flat plane. They all have their different levels that they're at. And we can see what happens when you turn that off. You've already kind of seen it before, but it's completely up to you if you want your images to kind of be at that separated layers for a stronger parallax effect. But you can also choose to keep everything quite flat. So I'm going to need to rename these, because if I call these images FG and BG, it's going to automatically place them closer and further back to the camera. So I'm just going to rename these so that doesn't happen, and it defaults to the 0Z position. So I'm going to name forest, and it is the same image, so it's just forest.png, except now it doesn't have BG at the front. And then same for the bush. You have FG bush. So now we don't have those tags at the front, so they will be all of these will be placed at 0 now on the same plane. Let's just load. You can see the difference. So now you can see it feels very flat right now, and that's because it is. Everything is on the same plane now, so there's no difference in depth anymore. You don't get a parallax effect, so when you move your mouse around, it's just like panning a flat PNG. I mean, of course, if you want that, it's your choice. It's a creative decision you have to make for yourself. But I did want to show you, if we go back, you've placed everything at different depths. You unlock parallax, which, it looks a bit fancier. It might not fit your creative vision, so it's up to you to decide whether you want to start making your scenes with these different depths, maximize parallax. You don't have to have loads of different animals. Maybe you just pick 3 layers. You have a background, you have whatever's in between, and you have this foreground layer. I mean, that's enough. Even just a background and some sprites, that will be more than enough to make things look interesting. If you go back to the question, this is just a background and a sprite, because the background is called BG, so it has that automatically applied to it. And this looks interesting enough, so it's not like you have to go too crazy with it, but that's a decision for you to make. So that's pretty much how to maximize the usage of photo mode in your games. It's very drag and drop, it just works. You don't really have to do that much to have your player experience this. They just press the button, it all just works. Take whatever screenshots they like. It's like, oh, I like this image here, snap. You take a picture, you have a screenshot, they can go upload that to, I don't know, wherever they want, share with their friends, upload it on social media. It's a little bit more interesting than, you have a visual novel, you hide the interface, take a screenshot. This isn't very personal. It doesn't look that interesting to just upload a picture of a visual novel. If this doesn't sound interesting, then feel free to leave, because, well, you already know how to use photo mode. But this is just the behind the scenes in case you wanted to maybe make something like this, or you're just curious what it's like to make some more complicated Ren'Py programs. So this is cute underscore photo underscore mode, the RPY. Here at the top, as always, I put a license. This one requires you to credit me, and also you can't use it for commercial use. You have to get my permission if you want that. We have something called init offset -1. This just makes sure we're reading the files in the correct order. Perhaps if I want to make an add-on to this, I can use this to my advantage. And then over here we just have a little thing that just checks if you've understood and read this. Set it to false if you want to self-report yourself. We have a little welcome thing just showing you, put this at the start. We have this, what all we're doing to actually activate photo mode is the hide interface. So when you have a default project, when you press H, that's what hide interface does. All photo mode does is it replaces hide interface with itself. So it's a little bit more interesting. But it's not like this is a completely new thing. It is still Ren'Py, just a little bit more custom. And then we have a bunch of variables that can change the behavior. So here we have default far BG distance. So when you call your images and you tag them with the BG tag, this will automatically place it at -2000, so that's further back. Likewise, if we have things tagged with FG, foreground objects, like this bush, it will automatically put them at +500. So remember, 0 is the default place where stuff is usually placed at. 500 means we're getting closer to the camera, and -2000 means we're going further away from the camera. So background, foreground, it's the most intuitive thing you can imagine. And then we have this backwards limit for the camera. This just means we can't zoom out too much. So if we start at 0, it means we can never zoom out by default. So like when you run photo mode, we can't actually zoom out right now because we're at the limit already. Because 0, it starts at 0, and if the limit's 0, we can't go back. Of course, we can go forward, all the way into the void, but we can't go any further back than we started. I mean, you can change that if you want. If I put it at, let's say, 2000, you'll see what happens. I need to reset the game because it's a default setting. So if you take photo mode, you can see, look how much further back we can go. So that's our new limit. You can set that to whatever, it depends on what you want your game to look like. I don't see the point in zooming out that much, so I put it as 0. You can change it if you like. And then, so when you open photo mode, you see these little settings we have that just tell you the controls, and you can actually change the font of that and the colors, I believe. So here's the font. See, I'm copying the value from GUI.RPY, so it looks like it's part of your game. I mean, you can change this font. You can link this to a file path to any font you like. But I've just defaulted it to copy your like GUI values, so it looks similar. It kind of fits in with your game already. You don't have to do anything. Same with this accent color. That's so when you click photo mode, when you click on certain settings like color menu, for example, you see how it turns blue. That's what the accent color is. And then these are just basic bars that take your bar style, specifically the slider style. So when you change your slider style in your options, for example, these ones over here, photo mode will automatically copy that style, so it better fits into your game. And then we have photo mode true or false. So you can actually disable photo mode completely. I'll just show you what that looks like. So let's change up the scenery. You can turn this on and off whenever you like. Say false. And then I'm just gonna reset the game. Let's change up the scenery. So right now it should be false. And you can see the parallax is off now, even though this is on. And when you activate photo mode, it's just like a normal screenshot kind of screen. We can't move the camera anymore. You can still change the colors if you like, but basically you can't move the camera anymore. You can use that for whatever reason you like. If you want to turn it off temporarily, you can change it to false, turn it back to true later. And then we have this parallax persistent value. That's the one we added a setting for. Settings are great for players. Always want to give them options. That's this bar we added earlier. Right now it defaults to the maximum. So you have seen this bar example I gave. Range equals 0.2. It defaults to the max. You can go to 0. Then we have some transforms. We have that photo mode active. Remember, that's the one I told you right at the beginning. This is what makes everything work. It sets its Z rotation to 0 just because it needs something there. And then it has this function called photo mode camera. That's actually a Python ATL function. I'm going to talk about that later. Basically, it's just like ATL, animation transform language, but as a Python function. You can see how that works later. But that's basically what that transform does. It just makes the camera follow this Python function. We have this version which has a pause. For example, if you have a transition, you want to disable the player being able to mess around with the camera for a few seconds. We have the Z distance transform I used earlier. This just places your images at a certain distance. You can see all it does is it centers it. It scales them back up, because when you move an image back and forth, it may make the image look bigger or smaller than you want it to. So this just makes sure it scales back properly. And it just places its Z position at Z, which that's the number you put in here. So we have this little variable, just kind of drops down over here. We have the far transform. This is what happens to anything that's called BG forest. It just places them at a Z distance of the default far BG distance, which is this setting over here. And we also have the FG distance, the near one. Same thing here, just takes the Z distance transform and it places it at that near FG distance. And then we have this config tag transform. This is how we apply these automatically. So anything tagged with BG gets applied to far transform. anything tagged with FG gets tagged with the near transform. Then we have the hide interface replacement. So this is how I managed to override the default hide interface action. So usually, remember, all it does is hide the user interface. Photo mode overrides that to become photo mode. And this is how you do it. Basically, there's this label called hide windows. This is a very special label that gets called when you activate hide interface by either pressing H or the hide interface action. What happens when this label is called? I turn off your mouse because we're trying to take pictures here, so we don't want your mouse to get in the way. We have a screen called photo mode. We're going to talk about that later. And then we have a bunch of Python stuff that sets a bunch of stuff to certain values and enters a hide interface state. So we have this Windows hidden special variable that, well, it does exactly what it sounds like. It hides the windows. We have voice sustain function. That means if you have a voice playing, this will keep it playing so it doesn't cut out or similar. We just turn our mouse back on, we hide the screen, and then we have to return true to tell Ren'Py that our hide windows adventure is over. We have some decoration. We have a dark see-through border. That's so when you activate it, you see that little border at the very edges of the screen that kind of appear, just to make it feel more like a photo. And then we have a little record thing. That's when you go into photo mode and you hold down space, we have that little recording in the top left, top right corner. That's what that is. Because I don't have any images, because I wanted this to be a single file, so I have to get a bit creative with my visuals. And then we have the photo mode screen. This is this screen right here that basically contains everything. So we have a style prefix called photo mode. This just applies styles automatically for me. This screen goes on a layer called photo mode layer because I don't want it to be on the screen's layer, because otherwise it would be hidden by the hide interface action. When the screen is hidden or shown, it sets some variables to what they need to be. Also, when it's shown, very, very quickly it moves your mouse to the center of the screen. This is because the way photo mode moves the camera is it follows your mouse. So when you start photo mode, it's just going to default your mouse to the center of the screen, and then you can move your mouse around. But of course you can't see your mouse because I've disabled it, so it looks like you're moving a camera. Here are some internal screen variables that just tracks the state of the screen, because we have a color menu. This turns it on and off. We have a UI on. I haven't shown you that yet. That's the X button over there. If you press X, it hides everything completely. This is the color menu. Remember, that's all the change colors you can have there. Then we have our keyboard control binds, A and D. If the photo mode isn't locked right now, that'll rotate the camera, basically, because it changes this value called photo mode Z rotate whenever you press that button, A and D. You see Q locks the camera, which turns off all our controls, basically, just locks it. And then A and D are rotate values. when you change that variable, it actually spins the camera around. We have the scroll wheel. This makes it so that you can zoom in and out. Over here we have this if statement it's an if action. This just makes sure that we don't accidentally go too far or too close, depending on our limits. Remember that limit we set earlier on, where we can't go any further. Let's just make sure that if that limit is reached, it doesn't do anything. Otherwise, it will just zoom the camera in and out. Basically, move the camera forward and back. There's A and D. When you press down on it, it activates the variable A press. If A press is activated, it keeps rotating your camera. Same with D, but in the other direction. When you let go of A and D, it turns those off. We have some other buttons. These change those default screen variables earlier. That just keeps track of what we're doing here. So we can lock it with Q. We can show the color menu with E. We can hide the UI with X. Then when the UI is off, you can turn it back on by just pressing your left mouse button, spacebar, or enter, just as you would advance the story in the visual novel. So you can press X to hide the UI, then if you press left click, space, or enter, the same buttons you'd use to advance the story of your visual novel, it just turns the UI back on, so you don't accidentally get stuck in there. And then if we're currently not taking a picture, it sets taking a picture to true and takes a screenshot. So that's how it takes a screenshot. I currently turn off S. Usually you press S, it'll take a screenshot, but I've disabled that during photo mode, so that you just click, you take the screenshot, and you have that screenshot with you. Now what does the take picture variable do? Why do we set it to true? Because when it is true, we have this timer that sets it back to false. So what this does is, if it's currently not true, or if it's false, then we can take a screenshot. If this is true, we cannot take a screenshot. We have to wait 1/10 of a second before we can take a screenshot again. So this is very important, because if the player were to press the button really, really fast over and over and over again, they might accidentally take a whole bunch of screenshots that they didn't want to take. So there's this very tiny 1/10 of a second delay between screenshots. We have some buttons at the bottom. When you hit space, this allows you to capture the camera keyframe. So we have space. That just captures wherever the camera is at any moment. For example, ta-da! It just places the camera. It makes your camera go to where you just put it. So let's just see what that looks like. So right here, the camera is moving. I'm actually gonna do something a bit more dramatic. This one's a bit boring. Let's move the camera away like crazy. And then I'm gonna press space and capture that. So now, and then I'm gonna replace this with that. And then when we play the game, so when you press space, it just copies to the clipboard a bunch of information. Basically, where the camera is at this point, because we're storing these variables like the X and then the Y and the Z and the rotate of the camera. We're just gonna send that to your clipboard. If you hold down the spacebar, that's what this repeat means. We're going to actually enter a recording mode, such that when you let go, so we have key up here, recording is in progress, you let go, we copy something else, and this is a much longer thing. Let's see an example of that. So instead of a keyframe, you can hold down spacebar, you have the recording, and we can move the camera around, even rotate it if you want. And then it copies something to the clipboard. Let's see what happens. I'm just going to paste it here. Well, there's a big recording here. Now, this isn't that useful, because you can probably just use the keyframe, but if you want to mess around with it, you know, it records your screen and you can play back what you just did. So it's a bit silly, but if you want to use it, go ahead. And then we have this part that says say recording in process. All that does is it literally, that is what happens when you hold it down. It says now recording at the top right whenever we are recording. See, recording in progress, but only if we're in developer mode, because this is not very useful to the player. So that doesn't happen if you build your game. Those record buttons don't exist anymore, because that's only for you as the developer. How does recording work? Basically, when you hold down the record button, we're going to store the current state of the camera, and we're going to make a list, and we're just going to keep adding to that list. So this is what this is. Every 0.1 seconds, we're just going to take the state of the camera, where it is, how it's rotated, and we're going to add this to a list. It's a really long list. It's just going to keep track of where the camera is at all times. And then when you let go, and it copies to the clipboard, it just pastes that entire list to your clipboard. Then we have a little decoration. That's that thing from earlier, where it says now recording. This is a little lock, because when you hit the keyframe button, it locks the camera, but now your mouse is actually free to move. So what it does is when you unlock the camera, it moves your mouse back to where it was, so it doesn't suddenly jump to a new location while you're moving your mouse while the camera was locked. And then over here, we have the controls. So when you open photo mode, you can see there's these nice explanations of what each button does, and just puts them in a nice little vertical alignment. We have this screen called Photo Mode Control Explain, and it's just taking a template of a button that you press and then the instruction, or it backwards. So you can see escape, return, Q, lock cam, and then A, rotate. And then for color menu, rotate the other direction and hide UE, then it's actually backwards. So that just makes it so that I don't have to keep rewriting that code over and over again. I just reuse the same template. Same with the other side with the mouse controls. You can see the patterns, very similar. I'm just using the same template each time. And sometimes the symbol becomes a lock because you can't actually use that control at that moment. For example, press Q right now, you see rotate, and then the other rotate. Zoom and pan, their symbols change to the lock symbol whenever I lock the camera. So then we just have some switches now and again of that here. That's what these ifs are for. But these are just the explanations. It's completely visual. And then these are the bottom buttons. Those will only show up in config developer builds. So your player will never see this. These buttons at the bottom here that allow you to record, because it's just not useful for them. Mouse controls on the right, same thing, it's just reusing this. Sometimes it locks if the photo mode is locked. We have some more decoration here. We have the border we defined earlier, and then we have these corners, and then a plus. So that makes the little things that appear in the corner. And then we have the plus in the middle. So that's how I managed to add those decorations without including any image files with this tool. We have the color menu. This only shows up if you hit that button that says color menu. It's just a little frame. It contains a bunch of template sliders that all kind of do the same thing. See, they all have this name. We have the slider that changes a value. So I'm just using the same template for all of these. You can even press this button and it will give you the color combination. If you want to use that, it just gives you this big long multiplication. If you like what you see in photo mode, you can put it in your script actually. You have the templates because they're all doing pretty much the same thing. We have a left button, a right button, and then a bunch of bars that just control it. Styles that kind of just determine what photo mode looks like with the text, the buttons, the bars. It's kind of just reusing what's already in GUI.RPY. And then we get to the Python part, where all the magic happens. We have a bunch of tracking variables of photo mode. We have the color shaders whenever you use the color menu. This is our layer that our screen is on, photo mode layer. We put it below the screens, but it's not actually on the screen's layer, or else it would disappear when you press H with the hide interface action. A little function that resets all the colors. And then we get to the ATL transform. Remember, if we go to transforms, we have this function photo mode camera. This allows us to do ATL in Python. So what does it do? We have some inputs. We have this trans object. This is transition. This is like your animation object. If you change the properties of this trans object, it will in turn change the properties of whatever this is being applied to. And then we have some other stuff that we don't really use right now, but this is stuff like how long the transform has been running for. So immediately, the first thing this animation function does is it turns the respective to true. This is really important for 3D. If you don't have it on, nothing will show up. And then we set the trans matrix color. Remember, if you change the property of this trans object, the camera's and actual animation property will change. So this is how the color menu changes everything. It's just a matrix color being applied to the camera using an ATL Python function. And it's just a big multiplication of all these color matrices. It's very long. And then further down here, we have this little check that checks if we're in photo mode. So here we have a little check that says, is photo mode enabled right now? Remember, you can turn this on and off if you want. If it is on, we do some other checks, like, is photo mode on right now? That's what happens when you click this button. It turns it on and off. When it's off, it does parallax effect. When it's on, we have the photo zoom in and zoom out, take screenshots, etc., etc. So when it's not on, all it does is do the parallax effect. Starts by setting everything to 0, all our positions or rotations. Then we're going to find the mouse position using this Ren'Py function that returns the mouse position. Then we're going to find a target that we want to move the camera to. Let me show you how that works. So with your mouse, it's going to return a pair of numbers from 0, 0 in this corner of your screen. Opposite corner, we have whatever your screen size is. So for example, if you have a 1080p game, this would go over here, X and Y. And then we have every other number in between. So it's like a grid of pixels. So currently, wherever your mouse is, that's what that function is going to return, the getMousePos function. Problem is, your camera, when it's centered, its 0, 0 position is actually in the center of the screen. So if you were to set your camera's X and Y position equal to your mouse position, your camera will be centered only when your mouse is in the top left corner of the screen, which doesn't make any sense. You want your camera to be centered when your mouse is in the center of the screen. Which means we need to calculate the offset between the mouse position and the camera position, which would be just half of the screen width or height. So we need to find these lengths and then offset the position so that when my mouse is in the center of the screen, like physically the cursor is in the center of the screen, that makes it so that the camera is also in the center of the screen, rather than the camera being looking at the top left of the corner, which would be very strange. So that's this part. So we have X and Y, that's the original mouse position, and we're just going to offset it by half, so we're dividing by 2 of the screen width for the X offset, or the height for the Y offset. And then we're going to multiply everything by something called parallax factor. So remember earlier when I gave you that setting called parallax, persistent.parallax, this just checks how strong we're going to move the camera. So if you set this to 0, our X and Y offsets are always going to be 0 and nothing will change. That's what happens when you turn it off. When you have it high, this will move a lot. So that's what the target is. That's where we're going to try to move the camera. Then we're going to actually go there. How is it going to get there? Then we're going to edit the trans X and Y offset. So this is not the target. This is the actual position of your camera. We're going to add the difference between where we are right now, the camera, and the target that our mouse is pointing at right now. But then we're going to add an easing factor. This means that because this value is small, we are not actually going to get to the target because the distance we're moving towards has been multiplied by about 5%. If we change this value to 1, what would happen is when we move our mouse, our camera will end up teleporting to that mouse position instantly, which will look really, really laggy and not fun to control. All this does, it kind of slows things down, mellows it out, the animation, so it feels nice to control. It kind of adds an ease to all our movements rather than instant teleportation. Then we have some other checks. For example, if you lock the camera, what we want is for our position to get to the target instantly. Because, for example, if you do this, you can see how there's a bit of lag to when the camera finishes moving because of the easing factor. It takes a bit of time to get where we want. When you hit lock, it skips to the target. So we'll do this, and then it skips. This is just to make sure the camera doesn't glitch out and forgets where it's supposed to be. So that's why it's called a boost, because it skips there instantly. No easing factor. See, we have an easing factor here. Over here, it's basically the same thing, but no easing factor. So it's like we're multiplying it by 1, which means instant transmission. We have some other settings. If it's locked, just do nothing. Then this is actually photo mode now, not the parallax version. This is just the same thing as over here, except there is no parallax factor anymore. It's just the whole thing, meaning we're going to go exactly where we want to. The difference being when we're in parallax mode is a bit not quite as strong. You can even make it weaker as you turn this down. You know, the camera isn't following our mouse one-to-one. It's more like a suggestion. When you enter photo mode, we don't have a parallax factor anymore, meaning our camera is just going to try and get to where our mouse is. Like a dog chasing after some bones or a ball or something. So the effect is much stronger. Of course, if you just turn the parallax intensity high enough, it will basically become photo mode, but this is going to make you sick very soon. So you don't want that all the time, which is why we have this parallax, which just tames the movement of the camera as it follows the mouse. And at the very end, this function returns 0, because with ATL functions, when you return a number, that says how long should Ren'Py wait until it runs this function again. And because we want a smooth animation, I want this to run basically every frame, so I'm going to return 0, meaning this will be updated every single frame that Ren'Py is running, so that the camera will continue to follow your mouse as long as photo mode is active, or just whenever you're hanging out in any of your scenes, but with less intensity, because it's being multiplied by the parallax factor. So that's the contents of the cute photo mode.rpy file. You can, of course, check it out yourself, see if you can understand it, but I've given an overview of what everything is about. At the end of the day, it just works. So maybe that was interesting for you. Maybe you just say, I'll just put this at the start label and call it a day.